Register arguing conservatives should leave big tech platforms. Joining me now is James Czerniawski, a tech and innovation analyst and Young Voices contributor. James, great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Sharon.
All right, so some folks are saying social media companies like Facebook and Twitter appear to be singling out conservative voices, muting or flagging stories and posts more than liberal social media users. Is that the thought here?
This certainly is what conservatives seem to feel. Conservatives certainly feel that they are being inappropriately targeted by social media platform websites, but there's nothing to suggest that that's actually true. There's plenty of left-wing sites that have been targeted as well by Facebook and Twitter during the same time period. It's just, again, when it's you that's being the target, you usually feel it a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much misinformation online, so many false reports. I mean, people spreading flat out lies, especially what we've been seeing after the election. It's mind-blowing. I mean, people posting disputed videos of election fraud, widespread election fraud, which we know there's no evidence of that. Isn't this whole point of flagging posts to make sure people know, not to single out conservatives, but to highlight, especially if that person is someone famous or with a huge following, that the information they are reading could be misleading?
Absolutely. I think that the reality is that, especially in this highly contentious election, that there's a lot of information flying around, and that it's extremely important that the American people are as informed as humanly possible when talking about any of these issues. And that's what social media companies are trying their best to do. And it's an admittedly very difficult task with the sheer amount of information that's just flowing across all the channels right now.
Are you seeing anything from any conservative leaders that are thinking about, Facebook or Twitter or moving away from it that are credible?
Yeah, there certainly are plenty of conservatives that have looked to go and move away from Twitter. They're not going to completely do so because Twitter still remains to be an extraordinarily influential and powerful tool for any politician, let alone a conservative. It has about 145 million daily active users, so not necessarily surprising that Republicans might be a little hesitant to go and deviate away from that. Mm-hmm. So what you're actually seeing instead right now is a lot of Republicans trying to utilize the government and legislate to force these companies to go and host their viewpoints, right, that are getting flagged, that are being deemed problematic by these social media companies. And that's just the wrong way to go. Leaving these companies, if you're truly disgruntled with how they're handling things, is the more appropriate route to follow.
Yeah, and since the election, we saw millions move away from the popular Facebook and Twitter apps, and they're switching to another social networking app similar to Twitter, I'm hearing, called Parler, which had a huge week of signups. What's the draw here, and is it any good?
So Parler is just an alternative app that has risen in popularity because it's an alternative to Twitter. Instead of having the focus be on moderating in the way that we see Twitter usually do it with labeling and fact checks and all those kinds of tools, Parler is a little bit more open-ended in terms of what it's willing to allow, which is what appeals to conservatives. And you're absolutely right. They've experienced record levels of signups during this time period, especially after the election. I believe their current count is that as of November, they have over 5 million people on the platform. Wow. So it certainly is very increasing in popularity during this time period. As to how it is, I think that it's okay. It's what you would expect from an application that's relatively young. I wouldn't be surprised if we look back at the early days of Twitter or Facebook that we'd see many of the similar problems. The user interface isn't all that great, but at the same time, it's something that's growing, and I think that there's lots of room for improvement there.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if it's something that's just taking off right now or if it can actually hold on. But certainly it is catching on at the moment. All right, James, thank you so much. We'll be watching this very closely. We appreciate your perspective.